My wife Kelly and I were with our friends Chuck and Beverly Conrad for our monthly last Friday of the month party. We had a nice dinner at Legal Seafoods and moved the party to Phoenix Landing for a night of drinking and dancing. We finished our first round of drinks and danced a few dances, swapping partners a couple times before returning to our table to order another round of drinks. A wave of excitement ran through the club. At first we were puzzled, but then we noticed that James Wilson, the new Patriots quarterback, had just walked in. He and his entourage took a table at the other end of the club, and just as things began to calm down, a new excitement began. Brianna Brown, the local host, had just walked in, but she was more than just a host. She was a former Miss Massachusetts and Miss America finalist, obviously gorgeous, and there were rumors that she was being considered for an even bigger market. Her group sat on our side of the club, but closer to the DJ booth. Beverly was staring intently at Wilson with her goo-goo eyes. "Damn! He can put those cleats under my bed anytime he wants," she said, panting. "Mine too," Kelly said. Chuck looked angry, and I tried to defuse the situation. "Need I remind you ladies that you're married?" I said. "Come on, Matt, relax," Beverly said. "Besides, it's not likely to ever happen," Kelly added. "Even if it does, it'll just be one night, a chance of a lifetime." What's wrong with that? Now it was my turn to fume. "What's bad is that it would be the end of the marriage," Chuck said. "How would you feel if Brianna was with one of us?" "Yeah, like that would ever happen," Kelly smirked. "Why is that less likely than you and Wilson? Chuck and I aren't exactly dogs." Both she and Beverly laughed. "Seriously, Matt? Beverly and I have been asked to dance at least half a dozen times already. How many women have asked you to dance?" "I'll tell you 0. "That's only because women don't usually ask men to dance, especially if the men are with their wives." "Whatever," they said at the same time, rolling their eyes. Anyway, Kelly and Beverly are pretty hot, and not just hot for housewives, but Chuck and I aren't exactly chopped liver either. We work out regularly, move well, and know how to dance without stepping on anyone's toes. The conversation was almost back to normal when Beverly started practically bouncing in her seat, clapping her hands like she was trying to bring Tinkerbell back to life. "He's coming this way!" she exclaimed. "Who?" I started to ask, then looked over my shoulder, and indeed Wilson was heading our way, stopping at every table to sign autographs or pose for selfies. Finally, he reached our table. "Excuse me," he said. "Would you mind if I asked your lovely wife to dance?" Although I was pleased that he was kind enough to ask me first, I was tempted to say no until I saw Kelly's head bouncing up and down like a yo-yo. I nodded, and when he turned around, he didn't even have to ask because Kelly had already stood up, taken his hand, and they headed to the dance floor. I had to admit they were a beautiful couple, but as the music changed to a slow song and she melted into his arms, I felt anger rise up in me. Just as I was about to stand up, I felt a warm hand on my shoulder and a melodious voice said, "May I invite you in?" I turned around and probably looked like a complete moron looking into the bluest eyes I had ever seen, and they belonged to Brianna Brown. I felt like I was in a trance as I stood up and followed her to the dance floor. The slow song was still playing as she wrapped her arms around my neck and pressed her perfect breasts against my chest. I gently placed my hands on her waist, but she moved them to her back. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to sound ungrateful, but why me? There must be a dozen guys here closer to your league than me." Her laugh was adorable, and her eyes sparkled with a special sparkle. "I saw what happened to your wife and Wilson," she said, and must have noticed my frown. "I understand how you feel. I've seen it before, and I'm afraid it rarely ends well." "What do you mean by that?" "I don't understand." "Almost every night the woman goes off with him, leaving her husband alone and humiliated. On rare occasions, the wife returns to her husband. I hope I can encourage your wife to make the right decision." "But why? Who are we to you?" She had a pensive look in her eyes and turned away, but not before I saw a single tear in her eyes. It's a long story. Maybe I'll tell you, depending on how the rest of the evening goes. My name is Brianna, by the way. I know I recognize you. I'm Matt Smythe." She looked at me with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, Smythe. I know that sounds pretentious as hell. Why not just Smith, right? Well, my parents are originally from England and wanted to keep a little connection to their native land. At this point, the song ended and I walked her to her table, thanked her for the dance, and walked back to our table. Kelly was already there, her eyes throwing daggers at me. So the prodigal son returns. Did you enjoy your dance with that slut? I beg your pardon? Why is my dance with Brianna worse than your dance with Wilson? Oh, it's Brianna, isn't it? By name already? I believe you called him Mr. Wilson? She had the courtesy to blush. Whatever you say, she said as I sat down. We started chatting with Chuck and Beverly again, but the tension could have been broken with a knife. After about an hour, Kelly had to go to the bathroom. Surprisingly, Beverly didn't go with her, but said she had to get something from closet and headed for the club exit. Beverly returned a few minutes later, but Kelly was nowhere to be seen. When I got up to go check on her, Beverly looked worried, but didn't say anything. My way to the restroom brought me to Brianna's table, and she stood up, stopping me by putting her hand on my chest. Please, Brianna, I need to check on Kelly. Matt, I don't think she's here. Wilson left to go to the bathroom around the same time, and neither of them came back. Come with me. I'll check the ladies' room and you can check the men's room, but I don't think we'll find them there. She was right. I had a vague suspicion, and we walked back to my table. Chuck's eyes popped out of his orbits at the sight of Brianna, but Beverly looked even more worried than before. Beverly, I said, Kelly seems to have left the building. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Chuck barely took his eyes off Brianna and looked at Beverly. Beverly, he said, what did you do? I brought my coat and gave it to Kelly at the front door. How did you know she needed it? Why would she want it? I could tell by the way she looked at me. She needed it so she could leave with Wilson. If I wasn't already standing, I would have jumped out of my chair. You thought it was a good idea. Why? I asked. It might be the only time she'd ever be with a real celebrity. Such an opportunity comes once in a lifetime. To be with a real celebrity. You want to fuck a real celebrity, don't you? Come on, Matt, it's not a big deal. I'm guessing you're not going with Brianna, she said, laughing. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Brianna said. I'd completely forgotten she was here. Come on, Matt, let's get out of here. And she grabbed my hand as we headed for the exit. We grabbed our coats, and as I helped her put hers on, I said, Thanks for the ego boost. I think I will go home to my empty house to prepare for the end of my marriage. What makes you think it was just a narcissistic push? Let's take your car. Why does Kelly have to be the one to have this once-in-a-lifetime experience? I looked at her, expecting to hear, gotcha, but instead I saw a warm, bright smile. What the fuck, I thought. I didn't have any better suggestions at the moment, so with my arms around each other's waists, we walked to the garage and got into my car. Where to, my lady? I asked, and she directed me to an upscale apartment building. The garage attendant was about to turn me away when he saw Brianna and gestured for me to come in. Brianna showed me where to park, and we took the elevator up to her apartment. I was blown away by her luxurious apartment. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Brianna simply threw her coat on the nearest chair, and I followed suit. Would you like something to drink? Brianna asked me. I'll have what you're having, I said, and she poured 2 glasses of white wine. She sat on the edge of the couch and patted the seat next to her. When I sat down, she pressed the remote and soft music played from hidden speakers. As we sat in friendly silence, sipping wine, I wondered what her endgame was. Did she think we were going to sleep together? If that was the case, could I? I had no illusions about what Kelly was probably going to do if she didn't already, but I had faith in my marriage vows. The only problem was that Kelly didn't seem to share my views on marriage vows. Could I have broken them? As Beverly had said, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Could I afford to turn it down? It seemed like Brianna was going to try to take the decision out of my hands when she pressed herself against my shoulder and put her arm around my shoulders. I just sat there, absorbing the situation, not to mention Brianna's intoxicating scent, when she obviously grew impatient with my indecision. She stood up, lifted me to my feet, and we began to dance. Shyness was not on the agenda when she placed my hands right on her ass. I began to realize that in the words of Borg, resistance is futile, and that I could enjoy myself and deal with the consequences later. This time I didn't wait for her to make a move. I threw my head back, and when she turned to object, I took her face in my palms and kissed her lips. I have no idea how long we stood there kissing, but when we broke apart, we were panting. Her face was red, and I'm sure mine was too. She led me into her bedroom. I heard soft music as she sat me down on her bed. She started unbuttoning her blouse, and I, as if in a trance, unbuttoned my shirt. I was under her spell as she slowly unzipped her skirt, slowly slid it down her thighs, turning so I could see the perfect curves of her body exposed by the lacy black thong. As the skirt fell to the floor, she stepped out of it, turned, and walked toward me with that modeling strut you see on many a fashion runway. We were bathed in the glow of some amazing sex. Was it better than with Kelly? To use a cliché, it was different. "Brianna, you said you'd tell me why you wanted to help me. Help us." She turned away, and I saw tears in her eyes again. About 5 years ago, I was working at a small TV studio, and I was just starting to make a name for myself. At the time, I was married to a guy who looked just like you. He was my biggest cheerleader, always willing to up the ante when a new opportunity called for us to move. We were at a fundraiser when the studio manager asked me to dance. He didn't even ask my husband, but I took his hand and left my husband sitting. I barely noticed my husband's anger and pushed it aside as Chuck carried me away. His name was Charles, but he thought Chuck made him look more like a man of the people, though he really thought nothing of those he considered beneath him. I can't say he used any great seduction techniques on me, though he did make a few subtle, well, not so subtle hints that he could help my career. To my eternal shame, I walked out of the club with him without even looking back at my husband. I'm told he was making a brave face, but was crushed. I wish I could say that the sex was out of this world, or at least my career really took off, but in both cases the opposite was true. Sex was uninspiring at best. He seemed to think that just being with him must be a big thrill. Meanwhile, rumors of our affair were causing problems. He was a big enough fish to keep the mud from sticking, but I was let go with enough severance pay to keep me from suing. My career took a step backward, but I've apparently recovered, although my heart breaks when I think of my ex. I hear he's remarried. He has kids we always talked about. At this point, she couldn't take it anymore, and I put my arms around her. My own eyes clouded over thinking about how Kelly and I had talked about our son and future children, wondering if we would ever have them now. I noticed Brianna had fallen asleep, so I pulled the blanket over us and cuddled her as she unconsciously snuggled against me. When I woke up, I found myself lying in bed alone with the delicious smell of bacon coming from the kitchen. I used the bathroom, walked into the kitchen, and was greeted by the sight of Brianna in a long t-shirt. She smiled at me over her shoulder. "Coffee should be ready," she said, nodding toward the coffee pot in the corner. I poured myself a cup of the nectar of the gods and sipped it until she set a plate of bacon and eggs in front of me. We ate in silence until I turned to the elephant in the room. "So, where do we go from here?" For a few moments she sank into her thoughts. "First," she said, breaking the silence, "you and Kelly need to decide where you're going to go. Can either of you survive what happened tonight?" "What about us?" She laughed, not without anger. "Matt, there is no us, at least not right now. We had a wonderful night, but we barely know each other, and until you and/or Kelly decide otherwise, you're married. If you can't work it out, maybe we could see each other, see if there's more than sexual attraction. I should warn you up front that my career comes first right now. If I get a better opportunity, I may have to move. Could you move, or could you put up with a long-distance relationship? Besides, in my position, I get hit on a lot. There could be gossip. I promise you right now that if we become a couple, all it will be is gossip, but you have to be willing to deal with it. Now go home to your wife. See if there's anything left of your marriage that can be salvaged. Here's my card. Let me know how things work out." With those words, she hugged me, kissed me warmly on the lips, and sent me on my way. I arrived home just as Wilson was dropping Kelly off. He smirked slightly at me as he pulled out of the driveway. Kelly and I walked to the door at the same time. I opened the door and she swept past me, the smell of fresh shampoo and soap emanating from her. I followed her and closed the door behind me. "Where have you been?" she asked defiantly. "Is that what she's asking me?" I thought, after what she'd done? "I was with Brianna." She almost laughed. "Yeah, as if. You were probably holed up in a cheap motel somewhere, licking your wounds." She was really pissing me off. "No, you can ask Chuck and Beverly. They saw her ask me to dance, and then we left together." "She probably just felt sorry for you. Put on a show so you wouldn't look like such a loser. She probably left you as soon as you left the club. It wasn't going the way I'd hoped. I thought we could at least try to get past what had happened, but her complete lack of respect for me made that less and less likely. I decided that one more conversation might take us to the point of no return, so I walked over to our closet, grabbed a large suitcase, and started throwing clothes into it. She just stood there with her arms crossed over her chest and a wry smile on her face, obviously thinking I was bluffing. Her look changed as I walked past and headed for the front door. "Come on, you're not going to leave just because I had a little fling, are you?" "No, I'm leaving because you disrespected me. For your information, I actually spent the night with Brianna, and it was amazing. I was coming home hoping we could work through our mutual indiscretions, but I can see that's not possible now. Don't call me. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk." I walked out of the house without bothering to close the door and saw her standing there watching me as I got into the car. I didn't want to give her the pleasure of seeing me cry, so I rounded the corner, slowed down, and let the tears flow. I paid for a week at the extended stay motel, and no sooner had I plopped down on the bed than my phone rang. I was about to ignore it, thinking it was Kelly, but when I saw it was Chuck, I answered it. "Hi, Chuck." "Hey, Matt, what the hell happened?" Kelly had just called Beverly, and by golly, she was pissed. She was pissed? I almost screamed into the phone. She dumped me for some jock, and when I told her I spent the night with Brianna, she laughed. "Hey, Matt, Wilson isn't just some athlete, and you have to admit that you and Brianna are a little hard to believe about you." "And so are you," I said. "Hell, you've seen us together, seen us leave together. Doesn't anyone respect me?" "Of course we respect you, Matt. But you and Brianna? Come on, be serious." "Oh, but Kelly and Wilson are plausible. Look, I don't know what's going to happen with me and Kelly, but I think I need to make some new friends. Goodbye." "Wait, Matt. But I've already passed out." Kelly and I went back and forth for a while. She even apologized for the Wilson stunt, but the real stumbling block was her disrespect for me. Even a call from Brianna confirming our night together didn't help. "Nice try, Matt," she said. "I think you're her charity project this month." I spent another week at the motel. Brianna and I went out a couple times. The leads even teased Brianna about her new mystery man, but she just brushed it off. One good thing about being alone, it gave me time to work on my writing. I occasionally posted stories on internet sites, much to Kelly's displeasure, which I believe was another sign of her disrespect. Brianna, on the other hand, when I complained that Kelly set my texts aside and never read them, insisted on taking a look. I resisted, fearing further embarrassment. I needn't have worried. Brianna was impressed, even made a few suggestions. I think that was the tipping point, and I filed for divorce. Kelly was stunned. "You're not seriously going to divorce me because of my stupid affair with Wilson, are you?" "Actually, no, but the fact that you consider my humiliation a silly trifle partly explains why I'm divorcing you. You don't respect me. I wonder if you ever did. You don't believe Brianna is interested in me, and my stories that you laugh at without even reading Brianna thinks are pretty good," I said, and walked out the door. Kelly was fighting the divorce, though I don't know why. Maybe she just didn't like the idea of losing. Our friends tried to help, but I think they only made it worse by laughing at the idea of me and Brianna telling me I'd never find anyone as hot as Kelly. Sure enough, the court ordered counseling. I went through the charade. I didn't do anything stupid like not playing on my phone during sessions, but whenever it came up, I made it clear that I just wasn't interested in marrying Kelly anymore. The counselor eventually relented and recommended that the court proceed with the divorce, and Kelly tearfully agreed. It was hard being a dad every weekend, but my son and I tried our best. It helped that the divorce, once Kelly realized it was over, wasn't particularly acrimonious, and we were able to live together peacefully. Brianna was at the last court hearing, and when we walked out holding hands, the look on Kelly's face was priceless. For the better part of a year, we maintained a friendly relationship. Although we were exceptional, we made no promises of forever. With Brianna's busy schedule and no marital obligations, I was able to devote more time to my writing, and Brianna continued to offer valuable advice. When my last story was finished, she suggested I submit it to a publisher, but I was afraid of being rejected. Brianna finally got an offer from a Chicago studio, which was a big step forward, and we had one last night. We skipped dinner to spend as much time together as possible. Although we made love, it wasn't some wild free-for-all. We probably spent more time cuddling, talking about our feelings, our hopes and dreams for the future. When she fell asleep, I got up and made a few more changes to my story before climbing back into bed and cuddling with her, enjoying the feeling of her snuggling even tighter against me. When I woke up, she was already out of bed, so I went to the bathroom and took a quick shower. As I walked past the desk with my laptop, I was puzzled to see it open. I was pretty sure I had closed it last night. I shrugged and headed into the kitchen where Brianna was making breakfast. I walked up behind her, wrapped my arms around her, and nuzzled my nose into her neck. She turned her head and kissed me. "Breakfast is almost ready. How about some coffee?" "Your wish is law to me." And with a wide bow, I poured the coffee and set the cups on the table. I'm afraid most of the cooking went to waste as we just pushed the food around on our plates and looked at each other. Finally, it was time to clean up so I could leave and Brianna could get ready to leave. We had already put most of her stuff in the car and the moving service came to pick up the rest. I grabbed my laptop, hugged and kissed Brianna one last time, and we parted with reassuring promises to stay in touch. I gave myself a couple weeks to mourn the end of our relationship, and then I began to cautiously enter the dating scene. I purposely avoided places where I could expect to see Kelly or our old company, though I did see them from time to time, but we never came close to each other. One day I was going through the mail and saw an envelope from Battles Publishing. I was puzzled and put it aside while I went through the rest of my mail. I took the envelope into the kitchen, sat down with a cup of coffee, and opened it. "Dear Mr. Smythe, we have received your manuscript and are seriously considering publishing it. Please contact me as soon as possible to make an appointment. Yours sincerely, Melanie Wilson, Associate Editor." What the fuck? I've never pitched anything to anyone. Then I remembered. The laptop I'd left closed but discovered open this morning. Brianna. She'd copied the file and showed it to someone. I didn't know if I wanted to kick her or kiss her. On the one hand, she went behind my back, and on the other, a publisher was interested in my novel. I decided to get even without telling her. I didn't know what connection she might have, but I hoped I could prevent someone telling her before I was ready. I contacted Miss Wilson to make an appointment. It didn't take long to come to an agreement, but before I could get too excited, I had to wait for the editor to do her job. I was thrilled to see that the text seemed more red than black. I swallowed my pride and started working hard on all her edits. I had to admit that she was right most of the time, and she listened seriously to my objections. She was right more often than not. After 3 passes, we were ready to print. I hadn't told Brianna, though we'd talked several times since I'd gotten the letter. I was signing a book in Chicago and called Brianna to arrange a visit. When she opened the door, she gave me a big hug and kissed me. "Oh, Matt, it's so good to see you again. What brought you to Chicago, business or pleasure?" "Hopefully both," I said with a wink. "I could help with the latter," she said with an exaggerated wink. As she walked out of her house, she was amazed by the limo. "Wow, things must be getting better," she said. "You could say that," I said. "This is your town. Why don't you pick a restaurant?" She told the driver, and we got on the road. Although we didn't have reservations, she was recognized right away, and soon we were seated. "So, Matt, what business brings you to Chicago?" "It's a surprise," I said, and she pouted. We had a nice meal, but we decided to skip dessert. "Shall we go to my place?" she asked with a flirty smile. "I have some things to do first. Why don't you come with me? I don't think you will be bored." She was disappointed and puzzled, but nodded approvingly. The limo pulled up to my hotel and the driver helped Brianna out, and I followed her. I walked her into the lobby and took the escalator up to the second floor where the book signing ceremony was to take place. I couldn't stop her from seeing the sign with my picture on it, and she threw herself into my arms. "Matt, you did it! You did it! I knew you could do it!" "Well, I had a little help," I said with a chuckle. "Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, Matt." "Don't be modest, Brianna. I never submitted my story and no one else had access to my laptop. You wouldn't make a good thief. You left the laptop open. I locked it that night." She blushed. "I'm not angry, Brianna. I never would have had the courage to send out my story. You believed in me more than I believed in myself. I can never thank you enough." "You don't need to thank me, Matt. I'm just happy to see you succeed." At this point, a representative from the publisher came up to me and told me it was time to sign the contract, so I gave Brianna a quick kiss and followed the representative to the table set up for me. I watched Brianna leaning against the wall, smiling as the long line of people lined up to get their books signed. Her smile faded a little as some of the women posed for selfies and kissed me on the cheek. I just smiled, shrugged, and was relieved when she smiled back. Finally, the signing was over and I joined Brianna, giving her a big kiss to make up for all the kisses I'd gotten. "Why don't you come back to my place so I can welcome you to Chicago?" As tempting as it sounds, my room is upstairs. Besides, I already let the limo driver go. "Not too cocky, eh?" she said with a wide smile, and we went up to my room. We spent the night reacquainting ourselves with our bodies, then took a nap before ordering room service breakfast. "Matt, where are we going to go now? Can you stay for a while?" "I'm sorry, but I can't. I have a few more stops on the tour, and then I have to get back to my day job." "I understand, Matt, but let's stay in touch. I really enjoy spending time together." That's what we did, talking, texting, emailing, phone calls, whatever worked at the time. My publisher expressed interest in my second book, and I spent every spare minute I had on it. As soon as I sent it off to my editor, I called Brianna. "Hi, Matt. It's nice to hear your voice again." "You too, Brianna. I have great news. I wrote another book." "That's great news. When can I read the next great American novel?" "It's going to take a while. I just submitted the first draft, but that's not all." "Oh? Why?" "If the book does well, I'll be given a contract for 3 more books. I can quit my job and write full-time." "That's great, Matt. I knew you had it in you." "Yeah, you do. I owe it all to you. Without your support, I'd still be writing just for my own pleasure." "Don't say that, Matt. You've got real talent, and sooner or later it's gonna come out." "Maybe so, but there are thousands of talented people who just don't get that breakthrough. If you hadn't sent my story, who knows if I would have had the guts to submit it myself." We argued, but she knew I was right. I don't know if it was my experience with my first book, or if I just had more confidence, but the editing process went very smoothly, and the book was soon ready for print. I had spent most of my vacation time on my first book tour, so I had to take an unpaid leave of absence, and I planned my stop in Chicago for an entire weekend. I didn't bother looking for a hotel and spent the weekend with Brianna. There was no way I could get enough of Brianna's amazing body, and no way I could figure out why she was so attracted to me. God, Matt, I love you. But you men can be so ignorant sometimes. She was suddenly silent. Neither of us had ever said the L word before. "Seriously, Matt," she continued, "I can be as infatuated as anyone with superficial attractiveness, but lasting love means seeing beneath the surface. You're attractive, sure, but what's special about you is what's on the inside. Even after what Kelly did to you, I had to practically seduce you to get you into my bed. What could I say? She was right, and I had no idea." "I'm sorry, Brianna. I don't know what my problem was. Maybe I just don't value myself. Maybe Kelly punched a hole in my self-confidence, but I shouldn't have projected that onto you." "It's okay, Matt, I get it. You just keep being a kind, caring person, and you'll never have to doubt my love for you." She just told me she loved me again, and I didn't tell her I loved her. Though being the perceptive woman I am, I think she knew. Still, I couldn't leave that thought in the air. "I love you too, Brianna." "I know you do, silly," she said and bestowed a soul-scorching kiss on me. The rest of the tour went well, as did the book sales. Back home, I invited Brianna to come visit. We visited some old places, and people who knew us from before seemed amazed that we were still together. Others recognized Brianna from her occasional reports on the show. I even got some recognition from my books. Every now and then, we crossed paths with someone from the old company, but I wasn't interested in rubbing their noses in my success, both personal and professional. For their part, they seemed too embarrassed to approach us, though Kelly seemed more angry than embarrassed. Oh well, life is too short to waste it on fools. The first 2 nights our lovemaking was wild and full of passion, but I had other plans for our last night. I took her to the most romantic restaurant in town where our conversation was full of tenderness, but nothing special. No, I didn't stage a big proposal at the restaurant. I knew serious discussion would follow, and I wanted to find a more private place. Where are we going dancing tonight, Matt? Actually, I was thinking maybe we could go straight home tonight, if that's okay with you. Sure, Matt, she said, clearly not realizing what I was thinking. When we got to my house, I hung up our coats and asked her to sit while I got some wine. Once seated, I handed her a glass and proposed a toast. To love and friendship, I said. To love and friendship, she repeated, and we clinked glasses. I sipped my wine, watching Brianna. When she finished, she jumped up, almost swallowing the ring I'd put in her glass. What? She mumbled. Is that what I think it is? I turned to her and took her hands in mine. Yes, Brianna, it is. I can't describe how my life has changed since you walked into it. I can only imagine what it could be like to have you be a part of it forever. Please tell me you'll be my wife. Oh, Matt, if you only knew how much I wish I could say yes. But I've already told you that my career comes first, and if a better offer comes along, I'll probably take it. I can't ask you to up the ante every time I change jobs. You don't have to. What do you mean? My last book was successful enough that my publisher gave me a 3-book contract with a big enough advance that I could quit my job and write full-time, and I did. Did what? I quit my job. As soon as my lease is up, I'm moving to Chicago. If you'll let me, I'd like us to be together. She just sat there wide-eyed and open-mouthed, then threw herself into my arms. Yes, I will marry you. We had a small wedding. My parents flew in with my son, Danny, and Brianna's parents were there with her sister. We spent Saturday with my family seeing as many places as we could pack into one day, and Brianna used her weather girl magic to give us a sunny day to get married by the lake. After a goodbye full of happy tears, we took a wedding trip to Barbados. It would be nice to say that we lived happily ever after, and we pretty much did. But 2 high-powered careers coupled with groupies, and, yes, I had my share, though I didn't understand why, can cause some petty jealousy. But we made a promise to always talk about everything, and we smoothed out the bumps in the road. Thankfully, there was only one move in Brianna's career, moving to New York for The Tonight Show. It didn't really matter, though, since I could write anywhere. We had been living in New York for about a year when Brianna surprised me with a pregnancy test. I didn't even know she was off birth control, but I was thrilled and looking forward to being a full-fledged father again. I love Danny to death, and it's so hard to say goodbye when my weekend is over. It was a little surreal with the whole country following our pregnancy, but we got used to it. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Brittany, and thankfully it looks like she inherited her mother's looks. Of course, the program had to have pictures as soon as possible after the birth, and video soon after. I had just finished a book tour for my 5th book, and the publisher wanted me to sign a new contract, but I didn't feel I had another topic, but I promised them precedence if I wrote more. Meanwhile, the royalties from the books, along with some movie deals, kept the cash flowing, and of course Brianna was making a lot of money, so I settled happily into my new role as Mr. Mom. If you ever asked me if I was happy that my wife cheated on me, I'd ask you if you were crazy. But here and now, I'm happier than I ever imagined.